Alright. Say hi, hi YouTube chat. So, ver- I just want to talk about this today. Um, probably one of the biggest things when it comes to combat design is, variety is the spice of life. Um, and there are plenty of ways to achieve this without breaking the budget. And I can name a dozen games that do this super well. There's all of the Halo games. There's Grounded. And then there's pretty much every old school Zelda game. And even some of the newer ones, mostly just Tears of the Kingdom. And I can actually say why Breath of the Wild is a bad example. Some other like, fantastic examples are any of the FromSoft, so Souls games. And I think Souls games does a really good job of uh, where your mindset should be on how do I, both Souls and Halo, how do I make a bunch of enemies and make combat feel different and fun and enjoyable without breaking like the animation or the like uh, without breaking the bank. So like uh, all of these games will create archetypes, and pretty much Halo, that is all the enemies they have. They got, and I'm just talking about Combat Evolved right now. They got elites, they got grunts, they got jackals, and they got hunters. They got four types, just four types of enemies with uh, uh, four types of enemies that they will go through and use for pretty much all of their combat encounters. And if you want to add the rest of CEs, the other faction, there's infection forms, there's carrier, and then there's uh, combat humans, combat form, and elites. This game is built off of 8 different types of stereotypes. Grounded is very similar. It has is flying, it has bulky, and then it has small bugs. Like that is if you want to break them down into their archetypes. Actually, and then spiders. So flying, spider, small, big. And all they do is swap out the weaknesses and resistances, maybe change the animations, but you don't even have to do that as much, especially if you're working low budget. You just need to change the values and uh, change the looks. And don't like you're not making one a giant bullet sponge, or you're not making one an or anything along those lines. And I think this is what I was talking about with Souls doing it very well, is they have kind of two archetypes. They got knights, and then they got beasts. And all they change is attack speed, attack damage, what like wind up on their attacks, and what type of weapon they're using, and that completely changes the feel of combat. Doing this is, especially when you mix and match, uh, perfectly encapsulates combat, which is why Halo is so great. You have 8 enemy types, which you would think would get really boring. And it can if you're doing 100 missions and you're fighting in 5 elites. If you, or if it is very set, but because they have differing enemy types and differing terrain and differing weapons, it opens up a whole new world on how combat works. So if I give you 8 grunts, an elite, and 3 jackals, that is going to feel very different if compared to giving you 3 elites, 3 jackals, and a pair of hunters. Like, that is completely different. And all it takes is 8 enemy types. And this is, like I said, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom did this well. Breath of the Wild did not. Because there are very few enemy types and they very little mix and match. So there's keys, and I'm probably going to spell all of these wrong, but it's fine. The Coblins, Moblins, and Lizalfos, and I'm just talking like normal enemies, none of the bosses. Because even they like, none of the bosses are almost ever paired with any of these enemies to make combat more interesting. Then you got Choo-Choos, this little slime dudes, and then you got Octoroks. That's it. This is their entire shtick. And you're all like, well, it's about the same as Grounded, or like Dark Souls only has 2. But they don't change these numbers enough. How many do they actually mix and match? They will give you Bokos, Mobs, and Lizalfos. They will mix those together. That's it. They will sometimes throw in a Chew, sometimes throw in an Octorok, and sometimes throw in a Keys, and they barely make a difference. So you feel like you're fighting hundreds of these 3 enemies that never change. All that changes is how much damage they do and how much health they have. That is not enough to get the same combat as Dark Souls. Because Dark Souls not only will change the weapon, it changes how they attack. Because it changed how they attack, you have to now think about, how do I approach this? And similar thing with Grounded. A bee and a mosquito, both are flying, but one has a slowdown effect, the other does not. The other one is a little bit faster, the other it hits a little bit harder. Very different. And it is very different when you compare those two to the Wasp or the Firefly, all of which fall under this one category: debuffs and slightly changing the stats. That's all you need. But like and then in adding variety, Grounded does this mostly in its area design, like that's where you have to go, but probably one of the biggest parts of the game that does this super well is at the end of the game you have to protect 3 different mixers for to beat the game. They throw everything at you. Pretty much everything except spiders. They throw ants, which are small, and they throw a lot of them, especially in the new update. They will throw ladybirds and black ox beetles. They will throw mosquitoes and fireflies. They also throw dust mites. Variety is the spice of life when it comes to games and combat design. And you do not have to break the bank when designing these. You just need to be able to change the variables enough where two enemies feel different from each other, even though they're using the same backbone and possibly even using the same art assets. Just make sure that at a fly you can tell the difference between the two, and then make sure that it's just enough where they feel different, and then mix and match. Because it is, like I keep saying, you throw 6 knights in Dark Souls, that feels very different from 3 knights and 3 wolves. Same number of enemies, but that combat feels very different, mostly because the beasts are going to rush you. The knights not as much. D&D is the same way. That's why that's why I pre-choose weapons for my encounters. I will say these two are just going to be shooting their bows. This one is going to be this spellcaster is going to be casting the spell. So if you want to upgrade whatever you're working on whether it's an FPS, a survival crafting game, an adventure game, an RPG, or just D&D or whatever, you gotta add in some variety. Mix and match your enemies. It makes so much of a difference.